In the early to mid-20th century, a new kind of warfare emerged. One fought not with guns nor tanks, but with ideas and images. It was the war of manipulation. At the forefront of this historic campaign was Joseph Goebbels, the mastermind behind the Nazi rise to power, and one of the most influential figures in shaping the Nazi regime. As Minister of Propaganda, Goebbels used media, speeches, and film to engineer an entire nation, bending public opinion to fit his Nazi agenda. He held the human psyche in his hands, molding it to serve his purpose. But how did he crack the human code? We'll explore his methods, successes, and his legacy. Born in 1897 in the small town of Reit, Germany, young Joseph Goebbels was no stranger to the working class. Living through the aftermath of World War I, Goebbels experienced firsthand the humiliation, economic despair, and political turmoil that plagued post-war Germany. He also endured the 1916 to 1917 German famine, known as the Turnip Winter, due to poor harvests and harsh weather. Despite these hardships, Goebbels excelled academically, eventually earning a doctorate in philosophy from Heidelberg University in 1921. During the Weimar Republic, Germany's first attempt at a socialist constitutional republic, Goebbels lived through a time of political instability and economic struggle. The collapse of the German Empire following World War I was humiliating, and the Treaty of Versailles, which forced Germany to admit guilt for World War I, fueled resentment across the country. Goebbels, along with Hitler, blamed the Weimar Republic and the socialists for Germany's post-war struggle, allowing various extremist ideologies to take hold. Most of them dealt with assigning a scapegoat to their struggle, a face-saving way to recover from the turmoil.
Throughout Nazi rule in Germany, Joseph Goebbels and the Ministry of Propaganda would portray the illusion of Germany's glorious past. Often citing the rule of the Second Reich from 1871 to 1918, Goebbels would illustrate this period as one of great German military might, cultural achievement, and national unity. Goebbels painted Germany's defeat in the First World War and subsequent Treaty of Versailles as the main causes of the cessation of former German glory. He professed that German defeat in the First World War was not a military defeat, but one lost at home. He blamed it on the Untermensch and socialists, undermining the war effort at home, forcing Germany into a premature surrender before they had been militarily defeated, even convincing the public that Germany had been on the brink of victory when they were forced to surrender. By blaming Jews and communists for single-handedly ending a period of German glory, he made them public enemy number one. At the same time, he used propaganda to convince many Germans that the Weimar Republic, Germany's post-war republic, was the root of the economic and political instability that persisted throughout the 20s and 30s. Joseph Goebbels knew that humans have sympathy for other humans, being able to relate on a primal level. In order to convince the public that the Untermensch were the true enemy, he labeled them as barbaric and less than human. This dehumanization unified the Germans in a tribalistic us-versus-them conflict. Tribalism is a very common concept used to unify societies against minorities. This is often used by tyrants to divide a population and is an early sign of an incoming hegemonic leadership. Goebbels masterfully utilizes this to unite the Aryan race.
Feelings like hate or fear, Joseph Goebbels knew, had the biggest impact on a person's perspective. He used these evocative emotions to justify his classification of certain groups as enemies of the state. An example of this is the Reichstag fire of 1933. This is when a German parliament building set fire. Immediately, Goebbels and the Nazi propaganda machine blamed the communists and used this as evidence of an incoming Bolshevik revolution. Though the fire was started by a communist, there is no evidence that he was acting on behalf of any communist organization. Goebbels used this to discredit and ostracize communists, labeling them as an enemy to the Nazi reform that would revitalize Germany. One reason why Joseph Goebbels' propaganda was so effective is that he controlled all media outlets. By controlling all sources of information and having them portray a consistent message against various minorities, Poles, and political opposition, there were no anti-government information sources, and no dissenting movements to latch onto. In addition, many opposing politicians and political parties were killed, imprisoned, or dismantled. Of these assassinations was the Night of the Long Knives, a Nazi purge that killed almost 100 anti-Nazi German critics. As a result of this political unanimity, many acquiesced to the fascist ideals being broadcasted.
Another one of Joseph Goebbels' masterful manipulation methods was utilizing existing German beliefs to strengthen convictions and begin movements. Goebbels knew that he must tap into the existing German beliefs so that he can play off of these or reinforce them to instill the greatest sense of national tribalism as possible. An example of this would be the long-standing stereotypes of Jews. Anti-Semitism had been ingrained in European culture since long before fascist rule, and it was still prevalent in German culture. Goebbels used evocative imagery, such as picturing Jews as vermin, to stoke these feelings. By reinforcing existing beliefs, Goebbels built trust in the Nazi Party. This is called confirmation bias, something that Goebbels used masterfully. It states that we are more likely to believe or seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. Joseph Goebbels' methods were no doubt masterful, and he became one of the greatest propagandists of all time. Some of his famous methods have been copied by more modern world leaders. Among these leaders is the 45th and 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Donald Trump has replicated and successfully utilized a number of Goebbels' propaganda methods. Among these is the big lie. A great example of Trump's use of this is his false propagations that the 2020 American presidential election, resulting in the victory of former Vice President Joe Biden, had been rigged against Trump, the Republican nominee at the time. There is no factual basis for this statement. However, it had been repeated so many times that many believed it, leading to mass protests and a riot at the American Capitol building. Another example of Donald Trump using Goebbels' techniques is his use of fear to unite the nation against a common enemy. For Goebbels, it was the Untermensch. For Donald Trump, it was the illegal immigrants, especially from Central and South America. Where Goebbels claimed that particularly Jews were vermin, dangerous, and a parasite, Donald Trump claimed that particularly Mexicans were an infestation, dangerous, and robbing American jobs. By describing these immigrants as an infestation, Donald Trump dehumanizes them, another tool used at great length by Joseph Goebbels. In the modern day, we are not past the times of hegemony and oppression, and being able to recognize the signs of incoming hegemonic leadership can be a vital skill, and learning historical examples of this is perhaps the best way to do that.